Once upon a time in Florence, Idaho, 1863, the air smelled of gunpowder, sweat, wet pine, and greed. Florence wasn't a town. It was a wound cut into the mountainside during the madness of the gold rush. Thousands had swarmed here like flies on a corpse after gold was struck in the Clearwater River country. At its peak, nearly 9,000 souls, dreamers, killers, deserters, and desperate men from every corner of the world crammed into muddy streets lined with canvas tents, false front saloons, and ramshackle cabins. The Civil War raged far to the east, but its shadow reached even this remote corner of the newly created Idaho Territory. Union draft dodgers and Confederate sympathizers alike had fled west, hoping the law couldn't follow them into the mountains. They brought their hatred with them. Every day, the streets echoed with shouts, gunfire, and the dull thud of bodies hitting dirt. At least one murder a day was considered normal. Some days it was closer to 4. Cherokee Bob had been one of the meanest. A notorious gunman and gambler, he'd finally caught a bullet from Rube Robbins about 9 months ago. Took the bastard 3 fucking days to die. The Boomerang Saloon was the black heart of Florence. Criminals, claim jumpers, whores, and card sharks gathered there like it was the only church in town. Down the street, the Masonic Lodge stood like a lonely fortress of order, the only place where men could sit without fear of a knife in the back. The Masons had taken it upon themselves to enforce what little peace existed, often with a rope and a tree when the need arose. Further up the hill, the thanks-taker, Reverend Elias Thorne, had built his Church of the Faithful. He'd come west with the Mormons years earlier, but found their vision too soft. Now he preached a harder gospel to anyone willing to listen. Take what you want in Christ's name, and be thankful when others do the same. And somewhere in the chaos of it, all walked a tall, silver-haired man with quiet eyes and a tired smile. Vulture Wild. He'd come to Florence like so many others, chasing gold, chasing a future, chasing anything that wasn't the life he'd left behind. So far, all he'd found was mud, bad whiskey, and the constant feeling that this town was one spark away from burning itself to the ground. He had no idea how right he was. Vulture Wild rode back into Florence one day with nothing but a tired horse, a Navy Colt, and the stubborn hope that this time, things might finally go his way. He was a decent man in an indecent world, a Union sympathizer who'd grown sick of the war back east and come west chasing the same dream as everyone else: gold. He arrived shortly after President Lincoln had carved the Idaho Territory out of the wilderness to keep the gold flowing for the Union cause. The town was already boiling over with Confederate draft dodgers, claim jumpers, Chinese miners, freed black men, and every other desperate soul the frontier could swallow. His first stop was the Boomerang Saloon, the loud, smoky heart of Florence's chaos. The moment he pushed through the batwing doors, the smell of cheap whiskey, sweat, and gun oil hit him like a fist. He spotted an open chair at a poker table near the back. 4 men were already playing. Vulture gave them a polite nod and sat down. The leader of the group was a slick, blonde-haired man in a flashy red coat, Simon Elian. He flashed a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Blood," Simon said, shuffling the deck with practiced flair. "Hope you brought money, friend." The other 3 were Jason Premier, big, loud, and already glaring like Vulture had personally insulted his mother, Pokerface, a silent, stitched-up horror of a man whose face couldn't move. He just stared, the mad stabber, red-haired, wild-eyed, with a grin that suggested he was one bad hand away from starting a knife fight for fun. Vulture laid down what little money he had and picked up his cards. The game started civil enough, but Vulture was a surprisingly good player when luck was on his side. He started winning, slowly at first, then steadily. The mood at the table shifted. Jason Premier slammed his fist down. "You cheatin' son of a bitch. I'm just playing the cards I'm dealt," Vulture said calmly. That was all it took. Chairs scraped back, guns cleared leather. The Boomerang Saloon erupted into a full-blown gunfight. Vulture wasn't shooting to kill, he was shooting to survive. He put rounds into shoulders, legs, and tables, trying to end it without murder. He was fast and accurate, dropping 2 of Simon's men who had joined the fray. But Simon Elian was faster. A single shot rang out. Vulture felt a heavy impact in his chest, like being kicked by a mule. He staggered, looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, and collapsed against the bar. The last thing he saw before the world went dark was Simon Elian standing over him, smiling that same cold, charming smile. "Should have folded, friend." While chaos ruled the streets above, something far older stirred deep beneath the earth. In the dangerous, unstable lower shafts, the ones white miners had abandoned as too deadly, the Chinese laborers had taken over. Using superior techniques, patience, and sheer desperation, they pushed deeper into the mountain than anyone had dared before, chasing veins of gold the others had missed. On this night, their picks struck something that wasn't rock. A strange, gold and black obsidian-like stone cracked open. An unnatural chill flooded the tunnel. Lanterns flickered and died. The air grew thick with the smell of grave dirt and old blood. From the fracture rose the Grave Master, an ancient, towering spirit wrapped in tattered black robes, skeletal hands clutching a massive net woven from chains and screaming souls. His red eyes burned with malevolent hunger. The Chinese miners screamed and fled in terror as the entity unfolded to its full horrific height. He did not chase them. He simply watched them run, then vanished into shadow. The Grave Master had been sealed away for centuries by the fallen Angel Powershock, one of the rogue watchers. Now free, he was weak but ravenous. He drifted through the earth until he reached Florence's sprawling, overcrowded graveyard, a place already heavy with fresh corpses from daily murders, mining accidents, and disease. There, among the crooked crosses and fresh mounds of dirt, he settled, waiting. He could not physically harm the living, but he didn't need to. He specialized in something far crueler, trapping souls on the earthly plane, preventing them from passing on, turning them into tormented ghosts he could command or feed upon. And Florence was producing new souls every single day. Meanwhile, in his church on the hill, the thanks-taker, Reverend Elias Thorne, suddenly froze mid-sermon. His eyes widened with dark excitement as he felt a powerful, ancient evil bloom beneath the town. He smiled. "Something wonderful has awakened," he whispered to himself. The Grave Master had found his first true servant. Simon Elian's gang didn't leave Vulture Wild to die in the street like a dog. They dragged him, still bleeding and gasping, through the muddy alleys and up the hill to the overcrowded graveyard on the edge of town. The silver-haired man's boots left long red trails in the dirt. By the time they reached the crooked headstones, Vulture was barely conscious. He looked up at the cold night sky, blood bubbling from his lips, and whispered one last quiet curse before his eyes went glassy. He was dead, but death didn't take him. A cold, unnatural wind swept through the graveyard. From the shadows rose the Grave Master, a towering, skeletal horror in tattered black robes, his red eyes glowing with hunger. With a casual gesture, he cast his ethereal net over Vulture's freshly departed soul, snatching it before it could move on. Vulture's ghost materialized, translucent and horrified, forced to watch his own corpse lying in the dirt. At that moment, the thanks-taker, Reverend Elias Thorne, stepped out from behind a weathered crypt, lantern in hand, a feverish smile on his face. The two ancient evils regarded each other. The Grave Master spoke first, his voice like wind through a tomb. "I cannot touch the living, but I can claim their souls. Together we can own this town, both the quick and the dead." The thanks-taker's eyes gleamed with holy madness. "And I want the gold," he said simply. "All of it, the mines, the claims, everything, in Christ's name, of course." A bargain was struck in that unholy place. The more spirits the Grave Master trapped and bound to the earthly realm, the stronger he would grow. In return, he would raise the dead as servants, zombies filled with the darkest, most tormented souls, to spread terror and help seize control of Florence. The ghost of Vulture Wild watched in silent horror as the thanks-taker began the ritual. Dark energy crackled through the graveyard. Fresh grav began to stir. Hands clawed up through the dirt as the first zombies rose, eyes glowing with unnatural malice. The Grave Master laughed, a sound like breaking bones. Florence had no idea what was coming. Enchantressa moved like a shadow through the night, her apprentice Amandosa close behind her. The two women had followed Simon Elian's gang from the moment the gunfight erupted in the Boomerang Saloon. Enchantressa's voodoo was strong. She had hoped to reach Vulture Wild in time to staunch the bleeding and pull him back from death's door. They were too late. Hidden behind a cluster of weathered headstones, they watched in silence as the gang dumped Vulture's bleeding body onto the cold ground of the graveyard. Then the air grew freezing. The Grave Master rose from the shadows like a nightmare-given form, a towering, skeletal horror in tattered black robes. With a lazy gesture, he cast his ethereal net and snared Vulture's departing soul before it could escape. Vulture's ghost materialized, translucent and horrified, forced to watch everything that happened next. The thanks-taker stepped forward from the darkness, lantern light casting long shadows across his fanatical face. He and the Grave Master regarded each other like old friends who had finally found a common purpose. Bargain was struck in that unholy place. The Grave Master would grow stronger with every soul he trapped on the earthly plane. In exchange, the thanks taker would be given dominion over the gold, all of it. The mines, the claims, the wealth of Florence itself, all taken in Christ's name. The thanks taker began the ritual. Dark energy crackled through the graveyard. Grave burst open as the dead clawed their way to the surface. The first to rise was Vulture Wild's own body. His ghost could only watch in helpless fury as the Grave Master poured a dark, twisted spirit into the empty vessel. Vulture's corpse twitched violently, then stood up, eyes glowing with unnatural hunger. No longer the decent man who had walked into town hopping for a better life. Something far worse now wore his skin. The thanks taker continued. 3 more bodies rose, Death Touch, a woman whose touch could drain the life from anything living, the corpse, a grinning, trigger-happy gunslinger thrilled to be back from the dead, and the hangman, silent, methodical, already testing the weight of his noose. Enchantressa watched in growing horror from the shadows. She clutched her apprentice's arm tightly, her voodoo charms glowing faintly in warning. The Grave Master's new servants turned as one and began walking toward the lights of Florence. Vulture's ghost followed his own corrupted body, helpless, screaming silently into the night. The nightmare had begun. It started without warning. Screams ripped through the night as the first undead horrors shambled into the main street of Florence. The corpse came first, laughing like a madman, twin revolvers blazing endlessly as he gunned down anyone in sight. The hangman followed, silently looping his noose around necks and hoisting men into the air to strangle. Death Touch moved like a ghost, draining the life from anyone she touched, leaving withered husks where living people had stood moments before. The Grave Master's resurrected army tore through the town like a plague of death. They killed anything that moved: miners, gamblers, whores, horses. It didn't matter. The streets ran red as the creatures rampaged with unnatural strength and glee. On the edge of town, hidden in shadows, the Grave Master watched with cold satisfaction. Every soul that died in terror was caught in his net, pulled screaming into his domain. With each new spirit he claimed, the ancient entity grew taller, stronger, more solid. The chaos had awakened something else. Deep beneath the hills where the Nez Perce had once roamed freely, the ground trembled. From an ancient burial mound rose the native spirit, Tukar S, guardian of his people. His skeletal form burned with ancestral fire as he sensed the desecration of the land and the suffering of the living. He moved like lightning toward Florence. The moment he reached the outskirts, he clashed with the Grave Master in a cataclysmic battle. The native spirit fought with the fury of generations, summoning earth and fire, striking with ancestral weapons and raw spiritual power. For a time, it seemed like he might prevail. But the Grave Master was older, crueler, and far more powerful in this realm of death. He overwhelmed the guardian spirit, wrapping him in chains of trapped souls and dark energy. With a final, crushing blow, the Grave Master subdued the native spirit, binding him in place. The protector of the Nez Perce had fallen. The Grave Master's laughter echoed across the blood-soaked town as his army continued their slaughter. Florence was dying, and something far worse was being born in its place. Chaos had completely consumed Florence. Gunshots, screams, and the wet sounds of tearing flesh echoed through the streets as the Grave Master's resurrected horrors rampaged unchecked. In the middle of it all, Enchantressa and her apprentice Amendoza moved like shadows between buildings, desperately casting voodoo wards and banishing spells to drive back the undead. It wasn't enough. As they rounded a corner near the general store, Enchantressa froze. There under the moonlight was Vulture Wild's reanimated corpse, hunched over screaming miner, tearing into his throat with bare hands and teeth. Blood ran down the dead man's chin as he fed with savage hunger. Floating helplessly beside his own body was Vulture's ghost, translucent and horrified. "Stop it. Goddamn it, that's disgusting. Get off him," the ghost yelled, swinging useless fists through his own corpse. "That ain't me, that ain't me." Enchantressa's eyes narrowed with fury. She recognized the trapped soul immediately. "Hold on, gunslinger," she whispered. She planted her feet, raised both hands, and began chanting rapidly in a mix of Creole and ancient African tongues. Green spiritual energy crackled around her fingers. Amendoza joined her, adding her own power to the spell. The magic slammed into Vulture's ghost like a lightning bolt. For a brief, agonizing moment, Vulture felt real strength flood through his spectral form. With a roar of pure willpower, he threw himself at his own corrupted body and forced the dark spirit out. The invading entity screamed as it was expelled, dissipating into green smoke. Vulture's ghost dove into the empty vessel. His corpse convulsed violently on the ground, then went still. A few seconds later, Vulture Wild opened his eyes, now glowing with an unnatural but controlled light. He sat up slowly, flexing his undead hands. He looked down at the blood on his shirt, at the dead miner beside him, and let out a long, tired sigh. Well, shit. Enchantressa stepped forward, breathing hard from the spell. Please, she said urgently, help us. These things are going to kill everyone. Vulture stood up, cracking his neck with a wet pop. He looked at the chaos consuming the town, the screams, the gunshots, the shambling dead. He gave a small, bitter smile. I was born for this. He muttered, drawing his navy colt with a steady hand. Then, quieter, almost to himself, or more like I died for this. He racked the hammer on his revolver and stepped into the fray. Vulture Wild moved through the burning streets like a man who had nothing left to lose, because he didn't. His body was dead, stitched together, and powered by pure rage. But for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, he felt in control. He heard screams coming from the town square and ran toward them. There under the moonlight, the hangman was working. The silent executioner had rounded up several masons, the only group that had tried to keep order in Florence. He had already hanged 3 of them. Their bodies swung gently from the large oak tree in the center of the square, necks snapped, faces purple. The hangman was preparing the noose for the next victim when Vulture stepped into the square, revolver in hand. You, Vulture growled, voice rough and unnatural. I've had a real bad fucking day. The hangman turned slowly, red eyes glowing beneath his hood. He didn't speak. He simply flicked his wrist. The noose shot forward like a striking snake, aiming straight for Vulture's neck. Vulture was faster. He dodged left, fired 3 rapid shots into the hangman's chest. The undead enforcer staggered but didn't fall. He whipped the noose again, this time wrapping it around Vulture's arm and yanking hard, trying to pull him off his feet. Vulture planted his boots and pulled back with raw undead strength. The 2 monsters engaged in a brutal tug-of-war. The hangman was stronger and more experienced with his weapon, but Vulture was fueled by pure fury. Vulture suddenly charged forward. Using the noose's tension against its owner, he closed the distance and slammed his revolver barrel into the hangman's skeletal face, firing point blank. Bone fragments exploded outward. The hangman retaliated viciously, his noose tightening like a python around Vulture's torso, crushing ribs that no longer needed to breathe. He lifted Vulture off the ground and slammed him into the dirt repeatedly, trying to break him. But Vulture refused to stay down. With a roar, he grabbed the noose with both hands, channeled every ounce of rage he had, and ripped it apart. The enchanted rope snapped with a sound like breaking chains. The hangman staggered, momentarily shocked. Vulture didn't hesitate. He tackled the executioner to the ground and unleashed a savage beating, fists, elbows, knees, and the butt of his revolver. He pounded the hangman's skull into the dirt until the red glow in his eyes flickered and died. With one final, brutal twist, Vulture wrapped the broken noose around the hangman's neck and pulled with everything he had. The executioner's head popped clean off. The hangman's body went still. Vulture stood over the corpse, breathing heavily even though he didn't need to. He looked around at the terrified masons still alive, then at the burning town. This ain't over, he muttered. He picked up his revolver and walked back into the chaos, ready for the next monster. Vulture Wild moved through the streets like a ghost in his own corpse, revolver in hand, green spectral energy faintly flickering around his fingers. The town was dying. He followed the trail of silence. Most of the screams had stopped. In their place was an unnatural stillness, the kind that came when everything living had already been drained. He found her behind the Chinese laundromat. Death Touch stood alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by bodies. An entire Chinese family, parents and 3 children, lay withered on the floor like dried husks. Their skin was gray and cracked, eyes sunken, mouths open in silent agony. Every drop of life had been sucked out of them. Death Touch turned slowly as Vulture entered. Green energy swirled lazily around her hands like living smoke. Her eyes glowed with the same sickly light. You, she said softly, almost curious. The new one? I can smell the grave master on you. Vulture raised his revolver. Ain't with them, she smiled, a small, cold thing. Doesn't matter, you're already dead. She moved like liquid shadow. The fight was immediate and ugly. Death Touch attacked with terrifying speed, lunging forward and slashing at Vulture with her glowing green hands. Wherever her fingers touched, life force was violently ripped away. Vulture felt chunks of his already dead body wither and crumble on contact. He fired rapidly, putting multiple rounds into her chest and stomach, but she barely slowed down. She was already dead. Bullets only annoyed her. She grabbed his arm. Vulture roared in pain as he felt the stolen spirit inside him begin to unravel. He headbutted her hard, breaking her nose, then drove his knee into her ribs with enough force to crack bone. They crashed through the laundromat wall and into the street, trading brutal blows. Death Touch was faster and more elegant, draining him with every touch. Vulture was stronger and meaner, using raw undead power and sheer hatred to keep fighting. She wrapped both hands around his throat. Green energy poured into him, trying to rip out the spirit that now controlled his body. Vulture grabbed her wrists, refusing to let go. His eyes burned with fury. "You motherfuckers took everything from me," he growled through clenched teeth. "My life, my future, my fucking body." With a roar, he slammed his forehead into her face again and again, then drove her backward into a water trough. He pinned her down, pressing his revolver directly against her forehead. "I'm already dead," he said coldly, "but you still got something to lose." He pulled the trigger 6 times at point-blank range. Death Touch's head jerked violently with each shot. The green energy around her hands flickered, then died. Her body went limp in the muddy water. Vulture stood up slowly, breathing hard even though he didn't need to. He looked down at the withered Chinese family visible through the broken wall of the laundromat. He clenched his jaw. "This town's done," he muttered, "but I ain't." He turned and walked back into the burning streets, looking for the next monster. The streets of Florence had become a slaughterhouse. Vulture Wild moved through the smoke and fire like a man who had already lost everything because he had. His undead body was battered, stitched flesh torn in places, but his eyes burned with cold purpose. Up ahead, in the middle of the main street, the corpse was having the time of his unlife. The grinning gunslinger laughed maniacally as he gunned down fleeing Chinese miners, his twin revolvers blazing with endless ammunition. Bodies dropped left and right as he spun in place, firing wildly and cackling with pure joy. "Hot damn, this is better than the first time I died." He howled, spinning and putting 2 bullets into a man trying to crawl away. "I get to do this forever." Vulture stepped into the open, revolver raised. "Hey, asshole." The corpse turned, red eyes lighting up with delight. Well, if it ain't the new guy you come to play." He didn't wait for an answer. Both undead gunslingers drew and fired at the same time. The gunfight was absolute chaos. Bullets flew like hail. Vulture moved like a ghost, using his undead speed to dodge and weave while returning fire. The corpse laughed the entire time, spinning and firing both guns with reckless abandon, his bullets chewing up walls, windows, and the dirt at Vulture's feet. They circled each other in the middle of the burning street, reloading on the move, though the corpse never actually needed to. Glass shattered. Signs were blown apart. Horses screamed and bolted. Vulture took 3 hits, 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the gut, 1 grazing his skull. He didn't flinch. He fired back with cold precision, hitting the corpse in the chest, neck, and leg. The corpse just laughed harder. "You shoot like a damn preacher's daughter," he taunted, firing wildly. "Come on, dead man, make it fun." Vulture's eyes narrowed. He stopped dodging. He walked straight toward the corpse, firing with every step. The corpse did the same. They closed the distance like 2 demons in a duel, bullets ripping through both of them. At 10 feet apart, they emptied their cylinders into each other. Vulture took the worst of it. His body jerked as multiple rounds punched through his chest and stomach, but he stayed on his feet. With a final, deliberate motion, he drew his second revolver and put 3 bullets directly into the corpse's head. The laughing gunslinger staggered, his grin frozen on his face. Then collapsed backward into the dirt, red eyes flickering out. Vulture stood over him for a long moment, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounds. "That's for the town," he muttered. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Florence, the thanks-taker had seen enough. The fanatic preacher loaded the last chest of stolen gold into his wagon, his face twisted with rage and disappointment. His beautiful plan was falling apart. The dead were being put down. His spooky friend was losing control. "Cowards," he hissed, "all of them." He cracked the whip and drove the wagon hard out of town, fleeing into the night with his ill-gotten fortune, already planning where he would go next to spread his gospel. Vulture Wild stood amid the burning ruins of the town, smoke curling around his undead body. The corpse, the hangman, and Death Touch lay defeated, but the true monster was still at work. On the edge of Florence, the grave master continued his grim harvest. The ancient spirit moved like a living nightmare through the streets, his massive net sweeping up soul after soul. Men, women, and children who had just died in terror were yanked screaming from their bodies, trapped forever in his ethereal prison. The grave master didn't seem to notice or care that his strongest servants had fallen. He simply kept gathering, growing stronger with every new soul added to his collection. Vulture could see them now, dozens of lost spirits wandering the streets in confusion and horror, chained to this realm, doomed to become the next wave of slaves. He raised his revolver and opened fire. The bullets passed straight through the Grave Master like smoke. The entity didn't even flinch. Vulture snarled and charged, swinging fists and firing again at point-blank range. Nothing. The Grave Master continued his work as if Vulture weren't even there. "Fight me, you bastard," Vulture roared. Nothing. With a frustrated shout, Vulture abandoned his body. The corpse went limp and collapsed, once again a mindless, shambling zombie. Vulture's ghost form, glowing with faint green energy from Enchantress's voodoo, flew straight at the Grave Master. This time, his spectral fist connected. The Grave Master finally turned, red eyes narrowing in surprise and irritation as Vulture's ghost struck him again and again. Thanks to Enchantress's powerful working, the ancient spirit could not simply subdue or ignore the attacking soul. The fight became absolute chaos. Vulture's ghost darted and struck like lightning, slamming into the Grave Master from every angle. The entity roared and fought back with tendrils of dark energy and waves of soul-crushing force. The two clashed all over the burning town, through saloons, across rooftops, and through the graveyard itself. Vulture was outmatched in raw power, but his rage and Enchantress's magic kept him in the fight. Then Vulture noticed something he hadn't seen before. Hidden beneath the Grave Master's tattered robes was an amulet, a dark gem pulsing with trapped souls. Vulture dove back into his own body, taking control once more. He rolled to his feet, drew his navy Colt, and took careful aim. "You've taken enough," he growled. He fired. The bullet struck the gem dead center. The amulet exploded in a burst of blinding light and screaming spirits. Hundreds of trapped souls burst free at once, howling as they were finally released from eternal torment. Among them rose the native spirit, Tukar S, burning with renewed ancestral fire and fury. The Grave Master shrieked in rage and pain as his power source was destroyed. The explosion from the shattered amulet knocked Vulture Wild flat on his back, but he was on his feet again in seconds, revolver barking as he emptied it into the Grave Master. The native spirit attacked from the flank, burning with ancestral fire and raw spiritual fury. Together they hammered the ancient entity, Vulture's bullets tearing through dark robes, while the guardian spirit struck with earth-shaking blows and waves of flame. For a moment, it looked like they were winning, but the Grave Master was older than both of them combined. His amulet began to reform, pulsing with stolen souls. Dark energy surged back into him. He grew taller, stronger, and unleashed a crushing wave of necrotic force that sent both warriors flying. Vulture crashed through a saloon wall. The native spirit slammed into the ground hard enough to crack the earth. The Grave Master rose, red eyes blazing with triumph. "You cannot kill what was never truly alive," he hissed, his voice like grinding tombs. "This town, all of you, belong to me now." Vulture staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his wounds. He looked at the panicked townsfolk fleeing into the hills and made a bitter choice. "We just gotta hold him long enough for them to get away," he growled to the native spirit. They charged again. It was hopeless. The Grave Master was simply too powerful. Every blow they landed was answered with 10 times the force. Vulture's bullets passed through him like smoke. The native spirit's ancestral fire was smothered by waves of soul-crushing darkness. Just as all hope seemed lost, a blinding lightning bolt tore down from the sky and struck the Grave Master dead center. The ancient spirit screamed as electricity coursed through his form, burning away layers of trapped souls. From the heavens descended Power Shock, one of the fallen angels. Golden wings crackling with raw lightning, pink dress flowing dramatically, eyes burning with righteous fury. She looked every bit the warrior who had once sealed this monster away centuries ago. The fight that followed was cataclysmic. Power Shock unleashed torrents of lightning that lit up the night sky like divine wrath. The Grave Master fought back with chains of trapped souls and waves of necrotic energy, but Power Shock was faster, stronger, and far more experienced. She danced through his attacks, striking with fists wrapped in electricity and bolts that shattered his defenses. With a final, devastating cry, she drove both hands into the Grave Master's chest and unleashed everything she had. A massive column of lightning engulfed the entity, burning away his physical form until only his core essence remained. Power Shock slammed the screaming spirit into a glowing golden stone she had prepared, sealing him inside with ancient Watcher bindings. The night fell silent. Power Shock hovered for a moment, breathing heavily, golden wings slowly folding. She looked down at Vulture Wild and the native spirit, then descended gracefully to the ground. She held the pulsing golden stone in her hand. "I fought this creature once before," she said, her voice carrying both power and regret. "It was my mistake leaving him sealed in a place where greedy humans would eventually find him. One of you must take responsibility for this burden now." Vulture and the native spirit looked at each other. The native spirit shook his head firmly. "I will not bring this demon anywhere near my people." Vulture Wild stared at the stone for a long moment, then reluctantly reached out and took it. The golden prison felt cold and heavy in his undead hands. PowerShock nodded solemnly. "Keep it safe at all times. If this prison ever breaks, the nightmare will begin again." As the smoke began to clear and the first light of dawn touched the ruined town, the surviving townsfolk slowly emerged from their hiding places, trembling, bloodied but alive. PowerShock stood in the middle of the street, golden wings still crackling with residual lightning. Her eyes swept over the battered people, then locked onto Amandosa, who stood beside Enchantressa. The fallen angel's expression softened with recognition. "A daughter of Lilith," she murmured. Amandosa blinked, confused. "Me." PowerShock extended her hand, electricity dancing gently across her fingers. "Your bloodline is one of the most powerful in this realm. Will you come with me?" Enchantressa placed a hand on her apprentice's shoulder and gave her a small, proud nod. "Go, girl. This world isn't ready for what you can become." Amandosa hesitated only a moment before taking PowerShock's hand. In a brilliant flash of lightning and thunder, the two vanished into the sky. From the shadows of a half-collapsed building, Simon Elian and what remained of his gang emerged, Jason Primia, Pokerface, and the Mad Stabber, looking rattled but trying to play it tough. Simon dusted off his red coat and sneered at the shell-shocked townsfolk. Well, well, looks like the big bad monsters are gone. That means this town belongs to us now. Hand over whatever gold you've got left, and maybe we won't." He never finished the sentence. Vulture Wild stepped out of the smoke, revolver in hand, eyes glowing with quiet fury. Simon's gang laughed nervously at first until Vulture started walking toward them. The fight was one-sided. Vulture moved like death itself. He disarmed Jason Primia with a brutal elbow, knocked Pokerface unconscious with the butt of his gun, and threw the Mad Stabber through the saloon window. One by one, Simon's gang was broken and humiliated. Only Simon Elian remained. The outlaw drew fast and put a bullet straight into Vulture's chest. Vulture staggered, then smiled. His body dropped to the ground, lifeless once again, but his spirit rose, glowing with green energy. Before Simon could react, Vulture's ghost grabbed him by the throat. "You can't kill what's already dead," Vulture whispered coldly. Simon's eyes widened in terror. He screamed, broke free, and ran like hell, his remaining gang members fleeing after him into the hills. The town was finally quiet. Vulture returned to his body and stood up slowly. The native spirit approached him, flames flickering around his form. "You fought well, Ghost Walker," the Guardian said. "My people owe you a debt." Vulture looked out over the ruined town, then at the golden stone now secured at his belt, the prison containing the Grave Master. "I don't want gold anymore," he said quietly. "I want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." The native spirit nodded once in respect. "Then walk your path, I will watch over mine." The two warriors clasped arms, then parted ways. Vulture Wild mounted a horse that had somehow survived the night. He took one last look at Florence, the smoke, the blood, the broken dreams, then turned west. He rode off into the sunrise, a dead man carrying an ancient evil, searching for the next darkness that needed putting down.